Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from Lincoln Financial Field, getting set for the Eagles game against the Cleveland Browns. It feels like it's been forever since we've been here. EJ, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Olivia. It's a beautiful day. It's a 1 o'clock kickoff at home, and we got some new digs here. I'm excited. It's a little bit of a redesign. It feels like we moved. It feels like we moved up a little bit in the world. Some nice light colors here. So I'm excited. New music got me a little bit pumped up for the game. So yeah, excited for the game. Excited for the show.
Energy, lots of energy for today's show. A lot of energy outside the building walking in here too. It seems like people are excited to have the birds back in town, and we're excited to be here with all of you. It's been too long. It was the bye week, a little bit of time off for us, but we missed you the entire time. The good news is that you can continue to engage with us throughout the show, throughout today's game. We're so happy to see you. Go over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. Leave us a question, a comment, either during the game, during the show. We'll try to answer some of those toward the end of our show today. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, leave us a question over there in the chat, and we'll try to get to some of those as well. So we're looking forward to chatting with you now and all game long. All right, EJ, we've got a lot to discuss as it relates to the health of this team. When we saw that week 5 bye on the schedule before the season started, you might have thought, this is a little bit early in the season. However, it came at the perfect time for the Eagles as they were dealing with injuries to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Lane Johnson. The good news for this team is that all three of them are active and available and ready to go for today's game. Brown in particular missed the last 3 games with a hamstring injury. Johnson and Smith missing the last game against the Buccaneers with concussion. So 3 huge players. It's really hard to diminish the importance of getting all 3 of them back. You look at the receivers in particular, the Eagles offense, just especially in the passing game, just hasn't functioned as it has typically in the past, especially when it comes to generating those explosive plays. Those have been down. And with Brown and with Smith back, the Eagles are looking to potentially open things up a little bit more and get some of those chunk plays that they've been longing for, especially since Brown came out of the lineup. When you add 2 guys like them who have the potential to do so much in this offense, how much can it really open things up for Jalen Hurts and the rest of the group?
Yeah, I mean, outside of Jalen Hurts, I would say that you could make a compelling argument that those are the 3 most important members, honestly, on the team. I mean, it's definitely in the offense, but yeah, I think especially when it comes to AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, we've heard the Eagles talk a lot about identity on offense, trying to find an identity, over the last couple of weeks, and I honestly think AJ Brown's return is going to help them find that identity. When you really distill it down to like, what can an offense, lean on? What can they rely on? What can they do when other things aren't going well? The A.J. Brown slant route, as we've seen, is something that they can rely on. He creates so much separation on in-breaking routes. Honestly, he creates separation on most routes. Doesn't matter, in-breaking, out-breaking, vertical, horizontal. He's the type of player that you can build an offense around. I think that this Eagles offense has become very reliant on his ability to create kind of, I don't want to say out of structure, but basically create consistently. Be somebody that Jalen Hurts can lean on when things aren't going well. So, having A.J. Brown back and also having Devontae Smith kind of to keep defenses honest, keep defenses from being able to key in, I think we are going to see an offense that's more reminiscent of that season opening performance that we saw where they put up 30-plus points, even though they had a really slow start to that game with turnovers. I think, that's what you can I think that's, I kind of expect this offense to get back toward that. Being able to kind of put defenses in binds because of the talent that they have. If you want to put 2 high safeties, you want to have 2 guys accounting for the deep halves of the field. Now you have Saquon Barkley that can take advantage of that space. If you want to sell out to stop Saquon Barkley, you have to kind of pick your battles, on the outside with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So I think that's how this offense is built. And, the fact that, it really showed how much they missed those guys when they were out, especially A.J. Brown, again, who I think is kind of like the steadying force for the offense.
And if you look to the offensive line, Lane Johnson could be also called one of the steadying forces of that group. Without Lane Johnson on the field this season, the Eagles have allowed a 43.5% pressure rate and an 11.6 sack rate on 69 dropbacks. With him, the Eagles have allowed pressure on just 26.7% of the dropbacks and a sack on 5.6% of those dropbacks. This is all from NFL Next Gen Stats. So some pretty staggering numbers there. Fred Johnson played in place place of Lane Johnson 2 weeks ago now against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought Johnson did a good job coming in kind of in relief of Johnson against the Saints. He had a good game. And then the following week against the Buccaneers, he just really wasn't the same player. It seemed like he was in Jalen Hurts' lap on just not quite every passing play, but it got pretty close. He allowed 11 pressures all game long, including 2 sacks, according to Pro Football Focus. So now they get Lane Johnson back. And the Eagles are going to, at least, like we already mentioned, be at full strength. When you have someone as reliable as Lane out there protecting Jalen Hurts, helping out in the run game, how much of a difference maker could he potentially be in today's game?
Yeah, I mean, while we're on the topic of fundamental things, foundational pieces of the Eagles offense, Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata being able to operate out on an island is definitely one of the key factors that we've seen with this Eagles offense for a really long time. Is having bookend offensive tackles who can operate without help. A lot of teams will have to chip tight ends or chip running backs, basically help offensive tackles slow down edge rushers. The Eagles aren't really designed to do that very much. I think, they definitely lean on the fact that they have 2 premium players at those positions. So, the result of that is you can get more guys out on routes. You can kind of build the structure of your passing game around the fact that you've got tackles that you can trust. And again, we saw the reality that most teams face in the NFL when they don't have tackles that they can lean on necessarily. And this was a case, the Fred Johnson performance against the Bucs. I completely agree with you. I mean, he was getting pushed back in the pocket consistently. Whenever you're allowing, almost 50% pressure rate, that's half of Jalen Hurts' dropbacks. He's got to deal with pressure. I think when you think about like the last couple of weeks with the offense not really operating in the structure, not really getting Jalen Hurts into a rhythm where he can hit his receivers, kind of within the progression, I think the pressure does, play a major factor in that. So, we can talk about the matchups that those guys are going to face later on in the show, but you do feel a lot better having Lane Johnson. I mean, it's been, several years now, throughout his career, we've seen the impact that not having him in the lineup has. I think it is like a foundational piece. It's kind of like baked into the offensive system at this point, having a guy that you can trust at that position.
Absolutely. So again, Eagles happy to get those 3 guys back. They've also made a couple other roster moves, including signing Paris Campbell to the 53-man roster. I would say a pretty well-deserved promotion there for Campbell to get a spot on the roster now and be a part, potentially a less of a part this week in the offense. However, when in the absence of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, he was definitely one of the more noticeable receivers and the more targeted receivers. And then they've also elevated Jack Driscoll, the backup swing tackle, to the game day roster, one of the backup swing tackles, I should say. Let's transition into our latest headlines segment. Lots of news and headlines and things to watch going into today's game. As we all know, the Eagles are looking to try to rebound coming out of their Week 5 bye, starting 2-2 this season. The good thing is that this could potentially be a get well game for the Eagles going up against the 1-4 Cleveland Browns. Particularly, it's been Deshaun Watson that has really struggled to start the season for the Browns. He's, in my opinion, playing some of the worst football of his career. He's thrown for under 200 yards in each of his first 5 games this season, and he's really not getting a whole lot of help up front. He's been pressured on 40.5% of his dropbacks, which is the 3rd most among starting quarterbacks in the league. That being said, Deshaun Watson has had some success in the past. So when you look at today's game and the potential challenges that Watson could face, what is the key to making sure that he does not turn it on in today's game and that the Eagles can really have a rebound game?
Yeah, when you watch the Browns' offensive performances throughout so far this season, obviously I had a chance to watch the Browns against the Commanders last week because the Eagles were on a bye week. I was sitting on my couch watching that game. And what stands out is 2 things, I would say. First and foremost is how often he gets pressured. And then the thing that really stands out is how out of rhythm, out of sync that passing game looks. I agree with you. I think Deshaun Watson, this is the worst that we've seen him play. This is one of the worst passing games I can remember in recent history watching, in terms of like the throws that he turns down, the amount of pressure that he faces. And again, just it looks, completely out of sync, out of rhythm. So if you're asking me like what does the Eagles defense need to do? They need to keep him out of rhythm. I think the pressure is going to be a big part of it. It can't be like soft coverages where, he can get to his first read quickly and again, get into a rhythm. We've seen that he has played at a high level before in his career. I don't know if that player is still in there, but if it is, a rhythm is going to be how he finds it, getting some confidence, getting some comfortability in the scheme. It's something that he has not been able to do so far. this season. They have a banged up offensive line. They are allowing a lot of pressure. So, we haven't seen the Eagles pass rush really generate consistent pressure this season. I think this is the game that if they're going to do it, this is going to be a game where they can do it. Deshaun Watson he's been sacked more than any quarterback in the NFL. So, I think that sack production is going to be huge today, again, to kind of keep him in this state of, a rhythmic state, let's call it, that he's been in so far this season.
He's also, he is decent at using his legs. He's got 19 scrambles this season, which is the second most in the league through 5 games. So the Eagles are also going to just need to make sure that he's not, using his legs to his advantage and trying to pick up first downs on his own. And perhaps they can have a better day today than they did week 4 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So as EJ, we've talked about so much over the past week, the Eagles have had, a lot of issues to address coming out of the bye week. Defensively, I would say one of those top issues that they've had to key in on is cleaning up the run defense. The Eagles defense is currently giving up 5 yards per rush, which is tied for the 3rd most in the league. And they're also having some tackling issues as well. Last week, or I should say, again, 2 weeks ago against the Buccaneers, the Eagles had 16 missed tackles, according to Next Gen Stats. When we spoke to Vic Fangio, he counted 15 missed tackles. So no matter where you look, it wasn't a good performance for the Eagles, especially when it came not only to trying to stop the run, but also just trying to make some of those open field tackles as well. We've seen some glimpses of a solid run defense from the Eagles, particularly in week 3 against the New Orleans Saints when they limited them to just 89 rushing yards. What will it take to see the Eagles try to replicate a similar performance that they were able to have against the Saints?
Yeah, well, one of the big factors for their run defense being so much different and so much more effective against the Saints was the fact that they were able to operate out of their base defense and they were able to get 5 down linemen in the game more often. We haven't seen this team run a lot of 5 down linemen in nickel personnel. It's called a penny front with 1 linebacker and 5 down linemen. I wonder if that's coming, especially we can talk about some changes in the secondary that might, facilitate that later in the show. But I do think that, the 5 down fronts cater to, I think, Jordan Davis. I think they cater to Jalen Carter. I think they cater to Milton Williams. I think that there are a lot of players who benefit from the spacing that they get in those 5 down looks. And I'm not saying it's going to be the end all be all, but I do wonder if that's something that maybe they'll address coming out of the bye week, is being able to operate out of those odd fronts more often. So beyond that, what you mentioned is the tackling. The tackling is going to be important. I was going through the stats before the game, and Jerome Ford, the Browns' primary running back, is averaging almost 4 yards after contact per carry. That is a number that would have me a little worried if I was an Eagles fan. We saw the tackling performance against the Bucs. Jerome Ford is the type of running back that can run through tackles if they are not fundamentally sound. So obviously we saw the Eagles practice that a lot this week. I think it's going to be important against this Browns offense because, when you watch this Browns offense, it's like they have to try something different. They have to do something different than what they've been doing. And if I'm Kevin Stefanski, I'm looking at this team's tackling performance against the Bucs. I think they're going to test that. So, going back to the previous question, how do you keep Deshaun Watson from finding something in this game? I feel like stopping the run and keeping them in long, basically behind the sticks is going to be important. Doing that is going to require, again, maybe some schematic adjustments, but definitely some sound tackling.
Gianni made a big deal about all the tweaks that came as a result of the bye week to the way that the Eagles practice. When we saw some different tackling drills that the Eagles were incorporating, poor safeties coach Joe Casper, I hope he is doing well as the Eagles tackled him in one of the drills. But yes, we'll see exactly.
Probably a little sore if I had to guess.
If I had to, they could have given him a helmet. Come on, right? Some pads, I don't know. But regardless, we'll see. Obviously, a lot of talk about some of the changes that the Eagles have made. We will see if any of that is able to try to actually come to fruition in today's game. So offensively, as we talk about some of the changes that the Eagles defense is looking to make, offensively, the Eagles have got to get off to a better start in today's game. The Eagles have just had abysmal first quarters. Opening drives in particular have been absolutely disastrous. They've had just 1 first down picked up on 4 opening drives to start the season. But if you look at the first quarter in particular, the Eagles still trying to score their first points in that opening quarter. You also look at the turnover differential the Eagles have been struggling with this season too. Jalen Hurts has 4 interceptions thrown. He's fumbled the ball 5 times, lost 3 of them. The Eagles currently sit at a -6 turnover differential, which is tied for the second worst in the league. So on the other side of the ball, the Eagles defense isn't really doing much to generate those turnovers. When you look at the odds of the Eagles trying to increase their success going up against this Browns defense, there is, we talk a lot about Myles Garrett and just how talented of a player he is, his potential to wreck games. But as a whole, when you look at that unit, how likely is it that the Eagles can right the ship in today's game against the Browns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to have to start with, I think that when we talk about the turnovers, obviously there's been a lot of talk about ball security and kind of harping on it, changing up some approaches in practice. But I think it really comes down to a much more macro issue. I think that the turnovers are symptomatic of a bigger problem, which is, like you mentioned, the slow starts. And I think it really is kind of like the I guess like the flow of the offense isn't always there. We don't see Jalen Hurts operating in the structure as much as I think obviously as the Eagles would hope. And I think that when Jalen Hurts is forced to do too much, he is, making some decisions, putting the ball in harm's way. Passes are floating on him. He kind of, I think a lot of the interceptions I watched his interceptions back over the bye week. And one of the things that stood out was just how many of them come, all the turnovers, the fumbles and the interceptions, how many come from him trying to do too much, whether it's in the structure of the offense or out of the structure. So I think having AJ Brown back is going to be big for that, kind of having more answers, being able to get easier answers in certain situations. But I think really when you talk about the turnovers, the rhythm, the steadiness of the offense is going to be the most important thing there. I think if you can get Jalen Hurts operating within the structure, going through his progressions, having, kind of like a flow to the game. I feel like if those things can happen, then he won't put the ball in harm's way as much. When it comes to forcing it to, Devontae Smith or AJ Brown because they're not quite open, but he doesn't really know where else to go with the ball, or it's a scramble drill where he's trying to get out of the pocket, he's running with the ball in one hand. That's where a lot of these turnovers are coming from. So I think when the offense, has more answers for him, I think that's when the turnovers will come down.
We will see if the Eagles can settle down early and try to get some points up on the board. I think that could potentially make things a little bit easier for them and allow Jalen Hurts to settle down and not feel like he needs to be Superman out there going forward through the rest of the game. All right, everybody, time for the best part of our show. We get to answer some of your questions and address some of your thoughts going into today's game. Let's take this comment here from Eagles PDX. A must-win game for the Eagles. How they win will be important. The Eagles are really looking for their first resounding win since, I don't know, sometime last season. And we'll talk a little bit more about our predictions later in today's show. But when you look at the ways that the Eagles have been winning, I know last year, I feel like a big theme was that the Eagles were finding ways to win. And even if they weren't winning pretty, a win was a win. But how reassuring would it be to see a really resounding win from this Eagles team against a straight up not good Browns team?
Yeah, no, I do think that it's important how they win today. I mean, like when it comes to the way that they've been performing the last year and a half now, winning 1-score games is like you can convince yourself that, oh man, they're just different. In the fourth quarter, they're clutch, whatever it is, whatever you might want to claim as why you can win 1-score games. The league history shows us that is not a sustainable way to win. If you're winning a lot of close games, then the odds are you're going to lose some close games. There's just luck involved in that type of thing. So, the Eagles have always, in my experience, covering the team and even following the team before that, they've seemed like they've always been built to get a lead and protect the lead. They've always been built to have a pass rush, to have an offensive line that can salt away a game, to have a running game that works well, and a passing game that can get out to an early lead. And we haven't seen them do that very often in recent memory. I think doing that today would be very confidence inspiring in terms of, being able to put a team like this away early and kind of just control the game. It's what we saw them do in 2022. I think it's what, a lot of people are wondering if they can recapture. So, yeah, I do think that how they win will be important. I don't think that this is going to be necessarily a cakewalk. I mean, the Browns, their defense has some aspects to it that I think could be a challenge. They have ways. I think the Eagles have advantages that they can take advantage of, but I do think that this game could end up being closer, a little bit more ugly than people expect. But yeah, no, I think that there's going to be a lot to learn about this team coming out of the bye week against a team like this.
They have a relatively easy strength of schedule, especially over the next several games, heading on the road with New York Giants next week and then the Bengals the following week, which a team that I think is better than their record shows right now. And we'll certainly talk about that when the time comes. However, it is critical for the Eagles to get some wins here at this portion of their schedule. Let's take a comment here from Jay Malone. They're discussing Cooper DeJean in this one in particular. They say that the Eagles should let the kid play. At least we know he can stick, wrap, and make a tackle. The big question right now that I think has been percolating throughout this past week is whether or not Cooper DeJean is going to start in the slot in place of Avonte Maddox in today's game. The Eagles, listen, they're just looking for a little bit of a spark at this point, and the Eagles drafted Cooper DeJean in the second round of this year's draft out of Iowa to make an impact in this defense. He has kind of been, I would say, mostly on the back burner at this point. He has played just 8 defensive snaps through the first 4 games of the season, primarily playing on special teams. Now he's in this role in Britton Covey's absence as the punt returner. So as he's been working his way back, he dealt with a hamstring injury in the offseason that he suffered prior to the start of training camp. Before that, he was out for, I think he hadn't played a game since November when he made his preseason debut in the Minnesota Vikings game, the preseason finale, after he dealt with a broken leg sustained at Iowa. So he's been injury riddled in the offseason, finally works his way back, and the Eagles have kind of been easing his way in to the lineup and now potentially having this opportunity to contribute more to the defense. Nick Sirianni would not outright say that he is taking Maddox's job, but we'll find out soon enough if he is. How much juice could the addition of DeJean potentially give to the Eagles defense if he does earn the starting role?
Yeah, no, I certainly think it could help. I feel like this was always the plan to have him, eventually be in the starting lineup, probably at slot cornerback. I know they tried him at outside corner, but I think a lot of people around the league viewed him either as a slot or even as a safety. I feel like what he can bring to this defense is kind of like what Jay Malone mentioned. Like he is able to come downhill and make tackles. When in the preseason game that he played, you could see that he was pretty consistent and I would say like trustworthy coming downhill against the run. I mean, Avonte Maddox just wasn't playing very well in that slot position, both in coverage and especially tackling. He had that really bad missed tackle against the Bucs. I think it was against Chris Godwin out in space. So, I think that Cooper DeJean is going to bring a certain level of tackling and physicality against the run. But I also think like when you watch his college tape, he was very good in coverage. I remember writing down about him that he projects as a guy who could match up against slot receivers, but also hang against tight ends and running backs. He's got the physicality, I guess the mixture of physicality and quickness to be able to do both. So, I think that, like you mentioned, the hamstring injury kind of delayed this. I think going into the training camp before the injury, I probably would have predicted that he'd be the starting nickel at in Green Bay or against Green Bay in Brazil. So I think that again the hamstring injury, they definitely seemed like they wanted to make sure that he was completely caught up on the defense and kind of confident in his ability to operate in the scheme. Now that we're there, I do think that he could bring a certain level of physicality that they've been lacking.
Absolutely. Very curious to see if he is going to be in that role, and we'll find out soon enough as the team starts to go through their warmups, and then ultimately we will see with our own eyes if he is out there to start the first Eagles defensive series. All right, let us make our player picks for today's game. EJ, obviously we've discussed many players, lots of players we're going to be keeping our eye on in today's game, but if you had to choose just one, who would it be?
I'm going to go with the opposition this week. I'm going to go with Myles Garrett. I have seen Myles Garrett up close in joint practices twice in the last few years. I guess 3 times. There were 2 joint practices in Cleveland. You know what? It was 2 because he was injured during one of those days. But I've seen him up close in joint practices. I've seen him wreck a practice. Obviously, I've seen him wreck games on television. He is one of the best players in the world in the whatever you want to say. I think he's probably the best edge rusher, the most dominant edge rusher of a generation. When you see him, he does not. It's almost like it doesn't make sense that he is real. If I'm being honest, he's the type of edge rusher that is he's a complete edge rusher. Some guys win with speed. Some guys win with power. He can win with both. He can win with his arm length. He can win with his strength. He can win with how quick he is off the edge. He's one of the fastest guys off the ball, which is something that the Eagles offensive tackles have taken notice of. I think Lane Johnson is probably one of the fastest offensive tackles off the ball, but I think he's going to get matched up against Jordan Mailata quite a bit. Again, in that joint practice where the Browns visited the Eagles last summer, they had Myles Garrett matched up against Jordan Mailata for most of the practice, and he wrecked parts of practice. Basically, they could not run plays because Myles Garrett was winning his one-on-one matchup against Jordan Mailata so often. Mailata said earlier this week that he's improved since then. I think, and I agree with him. I think, that Mailata has taken strides since that last summer. But even still, we talked about how the Eagles offense is kind of predicated on being able to keep their tackles on an island and trust them to win their one-on-one matchups. There are not many offensive tackles, even offensive tackles as good as the Eagles duo, that are good enough to hang against Myles Garrett for an entire game. I mean, he is just dominant. So I'm going to be watching him a lot. I think the Eagles are going to be. I think they're going to have to take note of where he is on every single play. And yeah, I'm sure that he will make his impact. But we've seen this Eagles team handle themselves well against elite edge rushers. Like Micah Parsons comes to mind, the times where they've kind of put him as the conflict defender in an RPO and kind of just basically just say, we can't block you, so we're just going to read you. So I think you might see some of that. And I think that, generally, I think the Eagles have the talent to keep him at bay. But again, I think he is going to win at times. He's going to impact the Eagles passing game for sure.
That is a good pick, EJ. I'm going to continue along with one that we've already discussed today. I'm very curious to see what happens at the slot position there, if it's going to be Avonte Maddox or if it's going to be Cooper DeJean. When we got our first look at DeJean in game action on defense back in that preseason game against the Minnesota Vikings, it was a rough day. I don't think there's any sugarcoating it. And he would tell you the same thing. He said this week that it was a pretty bad performance from him. That I think what you mentioned, the silver lining to that performance was his play in stopping the run and going up against the running backs of the Vikings. And I thought that on the flip side of that, his performance in coverage was not so great. He had, I think, he conceded nearly 2 touchdowns. And he also had, I believe it was an illegal contact penalty as well. So it was just kind of a bit of a train wreck for him in coverage. I'm very curious to see how much he has improved since then. Again, we have seen some flashes from him. A few reps in coverage this season, only 8 snaps from him. But I'm eager to see how much exactly really he has improved in coverage if he is able to get out there and start. If not, if it is Avonte Maddox, how much can he clean up some of the mistakes that he made against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? That big missed tackle obviously stands out, and it wasn't just him. There were a lot of issues all over the defense, but he was certainly someone who had had a role in some of their struggles as well. All right, for our predictions segment, I am excited to pick your brain, EJ, exactly what you think is going to happen in today's game in terms of the final score. But before we get to that, I am pleased to bring in Inquirer reporter Jeff McLean to give his prediction. I also, Jeff, want to hear from you before you get into your prediction. What matchup are you most eager to watch in today's game?
Yeah, I mean, you guys did a pretty good job of detailing all the matchups that are going to be highlighted in this game, but and maybe you didn't mention Jim Schwartz because you knew that I was going to, but having covered Jim for 5 years when he's defensive coordinator here with the Eagles, gotten to know him and how he thinks, and obviously certainly his scheme. This is an aggressive one, 4-man front, wide 9 is typically how he lines up his or allows his ends to line up. But one thing that's very different about Jim this season is he's blitzing at a very high rate, way higher than he typically does. Normally, Jim wants his four men up front to just win their battles and get after the quarterback aggressively in aggressive manner, one gap penetrating type of system, certainly against the run as well. But the fact that he's blitzed a lot is what's different. Maybe Eagles fans are upset that he didn't do more of that when he was here in Philadelphia. Some of that I think has to do with the personnel. Some of that I think has to do with the fact that he feels like he needs to do it because he's been so banged up on the back end. There's been a lot of injuries there. He's down his top 3 safeties. We will likely see former Eagle Roddy McLeod in the post or playing up in the box, wherever Jim feels like lining him up. Smart player, as smart as they come, but he's 34. He doesn't have the step. He's probably lost a step in some regards, and I think that's certainly someone that you're going to see Jim go after. But the matchup here I'm talking about is Jalen Hurts versus Schwartz. Jalen got to see Jim Jim up close and how he ran his scheme the 1 year that they were together. Jim's last year here in 2020. He's played against that scheme before. In fact, he did a very good job against the Titans, which ran a similar type scheme. Jim was there that year as a senior defensive assistant. And I think Jalen may have had his best game passing ever. 380 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, each one over 100 yards. And I think with the fact that the Titans are really banged up on the back end, this could be, there's a lot to say that they should run the ball, go ride Saquon. The Browns haven't been great against the run, but I wouldn't shy away against throwing against this defense. Denzel Ward is playing, but he's been dealing with a hamstring injury. He's not the Denzel Ward that we're used to see playing in in the NFL. But the one thing I will say about Jim is he's a very prideful guy. He wants to win every week, but he seems to get geared up for certain grudge matches. And I'm sure that he's going to empty the tank on this one. And we could see some different types of scheme configurations on the back end, and maybe that'll throw Jalen off. But Jalen's got to do better against the blitz. He did well in the first 3 games, but this last game they put against the Bucs, we saw one of the best ever to do it in Todd Bowles, and that really messed up Jalen, and he kind of reverted to some of the bad traits that he has shown against the blitz in the past. So it'll be interesting. I'm still going with the Eagles on this. The Browns are not playing very well. Deshaun Watson is not playing well. Their offense is very, very, very limited in terms of what they can do because he can't do much. So, if they win the Browns, it'll be because of Short's defense, but I just don't think it's going to be enough because they're so injured. I think I have you need a score, right? I think I have the Eagles winning 26-20.
All right, EJ, what do you think for today's game? What is going to be the final score?
Yeah, I see it a lot the same way that Jeff sees it. I have the Eagles winning 24-13. I think there's probably going to be a moment in this game where things are a little tense. I feel like I could see a slow start from the Eagles offense. I could see a couple of stagnant drives where things are starting to seem like maybe this game will be closer than we expect. But I do think they should be able to win. I just haven't seen enough from this Browns offense to think that they're going to be able to put up a lot of points here. And yeah, I do think the Eagles offense, getting A.J. Brown back, getting Devontae Smith back, getting Lane Johnson back to help protect Jalen Hurts, maybe not matched up against Myles Garrett very often, but just to protect Jalen Hurts against those blitzes and everything else. I do feel like the Eagles should be able to get enough offensive output to win this one. So yeah, I have them winning 24-13.
All right, I'm going to echo everybody else here. I will also just preface this. I am 0 for 4 on my predictions so far this season, so maybe take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I am picking the Eagles 24-17 to win this game. Again, Deshaun Watson has been somewhat of a nightmare this season, playing some of his worst football to this point, and I think that the Eagles defense could potentially get well against them. And then in terms of just this Eagles offense, I think the additions of all 3 of those big pieces can really help them. And we really haven't seen exactly what this Eagles offense is. Even in the Green Bay Packers game, even though they were able to put up quite a few points against them, I thought the Eagles played some really sloppy football to start the game. So I think today could provide an opportunity for us to see really what this Eagles offense could look like. So I'm curious to see what that might be. And I'm eager, I'm sure, just as all of you, for them to get into it. So that is going to do it for us today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, make sure you're tuning in to Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day for all of your football coverage. Eagles football coverage will be over there throughout the game, interacting with you, taking your questions, answering whatever is on your mind. So we look forward to seeing you there.
Coverage on my podcast, Uncovering the Birds. New episodes released every week. Listen to wherever you get your podcasts or go Inquirer.com/podcast.
Again, that is all for today. Thanks so much for tuning into Game Day Central, and we will see you next time.